everyone. I'm
Mhm.
Samita, the founder of AFACparent.com and your host here at the Positive Parenting Conference. This is a masterclass on removing shame from parenting. And our expert guide for this masterclass is Mercedes Samudio. Welcome, Mercedes.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So Mercedes is a parent coach, a speaker, a best selling author, and founder of the Diversity in Parenting Conference.
Mhm.
She started the hashtag End Parent Shaming movement, as well as coined the term shame proof parenting, using both to bring awareness to ending parent shame.
Mhm.
She has been featured in the Huffington Post, US News and Report, Women's Day, LA Parent Magazine, and many other outlets. Her popular book, Shame Proof Parenting, is the inspiration for our masterclass today. Ready to get started, Mercedes?
I am.
Okay, so when we normally talk about guilt and shame, we talk about it in the context of raising our kids.
Mhm.
But what you are talking about is the shame that parents feel, right? About how we parent and how our children behave, and even the choices they make.
Mhm.
So let's start with that. Where is the shame coming from?
Yeah. I think when I look at all the parents that I've worked with over a decade of doing this work, I realize that the shame comes from both external and internal influences. So we have this external influence of our society and our culture that says this is how you're supposed to parent. And if you don't parent at this level, then you're doing it wrong or you're a bad parent. And so that's always changing. When I was younger, it was a certain way. When you were younger, it was a certain way. And now it's different, right? And so parents are always trying to keep up with what society says is the accurate, best way to parent. And sometimes, depending on the parents' own healing and their own development, they might not be able to meet those expectations, whatever that looks like. And then that turns into shame. I'm not the parent that society says I should be, so I must therefore be a bad parent.
Hmm.
That's the external space. Then we have the internal space that comes from all of our years of being human ourselves, right? Watching how our parents did it, wishing our parents had did it better, our own expectations that we put on ourselves, and we'll talk about some of that over the talk. How you put such impossible expectations on yourself as a parent that then you have this internal shame that says you're not doing it right based on whatever those impossible expectations are that you've placed on yourself.
Right. And this looks very different for everybody, right? Because all of us have both different external circumstances. Because, for instance, I was raised in India, and
Mm.
the culture there is very different from the culture here, and expectations there are different from here. So when I come from there to here, the expectations here on the kind of parent I should be are different from what I've seen growing up. So
Right.
each of
Right.
us has our own shame story, right? This
Yes.
is not a
Yes.
common thing.
No, it's not. And every parent, like you just said, is coming from, even if you were born in America, there's still so many different cultural norms, right? Socioeconomic norms, identity norms that you are contending with at any given time, as well as contending with whatever the culture says you're supposed to be doing as a parent. And again, being in America, you've probably realized that it changes every so often, that you're supposed to be this type of parent one year, and the next year there's some new research that comes out. You're supposed to be doing this now. And I was talking to a friend the other day, a colleague, we were talking about how every couple years, the type of food you're supposed to eat changes, where one year coffee's bad for you, the next year drink coffee because it reduces this. And you're like, how do you keep up with all of the things that are changing just as yourself?
Yeah, I still haven't decided if egg is good for me or bad. I
Right,
just
right,
keep looking up for information, and there's such strong arguments on both sides, right? And it's the
right.
same with parenting. It's like, do
Yeah,
this, don't do this.
right.
So, so the social media that surrounds us these days, and we are so wrapped in it, that's not helping, is it? Like
No,
Facebook, Instagram,
no.
Pinterest, because at any point right now, we are just one post away from feeling miserable about some decision that we made, or
Mhm.
completely being overtaken by irrational jealousy over how somebody else is living their life, right? So social media is kind of adding to this feeling of shame. that
Yes.
is part of human nature.
I agree. And I think social media has its positive space too, where a lot of women connect with, or a lot of parents, I would say, because I think men do it too, they connect with others, right? Who maybe they don't have that close knit family or those close knit set of friends that are there with them face to face, but they can pop on to a social media channel and find that camaraderie and find that space where they feel healthy. That's positive. But I think many of us are using social media to kind of validate how we are existing in the world. And so I post my child's first day of school pictures. I post my child's award ceremony. I post my child's X and Y and Z, while other people are either validating me by saying, good job, you're doing a great job, or people aren't validating me by not responding and not liking. And that can also be difficult where you post something and no one responds, right?
Right.
Then you feel like, did I do it right? Am I good enough?
And
I often meet, right.
go ahead, sorry.
No worries. I was going to say, I often meet parents who talk to me about how they will look at other friends of theirs, their kids' birthday parties or their kids' celebrations, and often feel guilty because they aren't able to do those type of celebrations. I've had parents tell me I feel bad because I can't take my kids to amusement parks and take that beautiful family picture like other parents can because my kid has some issue or some developmental thing that stops them from being able to manage an amusement park and things like that. So on one end, people use social media, I think parents especially for camaraderie and support, but I think more times than not, we're just kind of being passive about it. We're just scrolling through, seeing other people and doing what you said, making judgments about ourselves and maybe even them.
Right. So the point I was thinking of earlier is sometimes when people don't respond to your post, it may just be that you posted at a time where everybody was busy with something else, right? You might not even realize, but you take that way too personally because of the story that's going on in your own head, right? And
Exactly.
that's so I love this point that you brought up, that social media as such, it's easy to paint it as bad, but by itself it's not bad, and it can in fact be a great place for us to go find our community and go
Right.
find our other like-minded parents that
Right.
we can sync with.
Right.
But depending on how we see it and our lens, it could add to this shame story, right?
Correct. 100% correct. 100% correct.
Awesome, awesome. So if left unchecked, this shame has a way of perpetuating itself from one generation to another and
Yep.
just going on and on and on,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
can you talk a little about how we can avoid recreating shame in our children?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so important that I teach the families that I work with and the professionals that I work with too about how to facilitate this in their work is to really give parents a space to actually talk about what is shame to them. And like you said earlier, we all have different shame stories. So to have that space to actually talk about, what do I feel embarrassed about? What do I feel ashamed of? What expectations have I placed on myself? And how do I feel about how I have or have not met those expectations? I think talking about these stories and having a space for it is so important. And that's why I'm so huge on ending parent shame, because if we have a whole culture of shaming parents, parents never feel comfortable saying, I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm struggling, or I'm embarrassed. So if I can't say that, that means I'm not dealing with it, which means I keep doing it, right? Inadvertently without thinking about it. And so when I talk to families about how to do that, we talk about what it is that you wanted for your family and what's actually happening. And how does that feel to live in a family where you don't have the perfect family or the vision of the family that you thought you were going to have. Another aspect that we talk about a lot of times too is we talk about what's called a parenting identity, and this idea of how did you come into your role as a parent, right? What myths, what decisions, what definitions, what ideas did you have about what you were supposed to be doing as a caregiver, right? And we all have different cultural norms. Like I'm sure in India, they say this is what you're supposed to be and this is how you're supposed to do. In America, it's like a mom is this, a dad is that. Like we come into all of that. And so figuring out what that is for you and how that's either helping or hindering your parenting is going to be really helpful too at reducing that shame. Because if I'm living with an old story of what I'm supposed to be doing and it's not helping me and my family, I'm going to feel ashamed. So I have to kind of rewrite that or reframe that story for myself so I could feel less shame around who I am and what I'm able to do for my family.
And that shame that we carry around impacts all our decisions, right?
It does, every single one.
Go ahead. So
yeah, I'm gonna say every single one. Yeah.
So how does it impact our parenting choices when it comes to the way we decide what's right for our kids or the message that we send them? Can you talk to us a little about how our shame impacts this very practical way of how we conduct our life, especially how we conduct the business of raising our kids?
Yeah. So I think one of the most obvious ways is that it changes the way that we connect to ourselves and to our child. I've worked with parents so much who internally they know what's going on with their kid. For instance, they know their child might be on the spectrum, or they know that their child is dealing with some behavioral or some developmental issues that other people don't know about. But when they get around those people, people say, oh, your kid is so bad. Oh, your kid doesn't know how to listen. Oh, if that was my kid, I would X, Y, and Z, And so then you change how you respond to your child because of how these people are experiencing you in your parenting. I was working with a mom, for example, where she was talking to me about how lively and exuberant and outgoing their child is. And in her culture, children are to be seen and not heard. Oh. And so to have a child who talks and speaks and is very lively, the adults in her family didn't know how to manage that. And so they would say things like, oh, he's so bad. He needs to learn how to sit down. He has too much energy. He has ADHD. And he didn't have any of that. He was just a very outgoing kid. And so she found herself yelling at him a lot, and telling him to sit down because she was trying to manage the shame she was feeling from other people in the family telling her that he was bad, even though she knew in her heart that he was just an exuberant kid who liked to talk and liked to be center of attention. And so we worked on how she could find her voice to tell her family members, this is my child. Right? He likes to talk. He likes to do these things. He's not bad. He doesn't have attention issues. That's just his personality. And so that example shows how if you in your heart as a parent, and many parents know who their child truly is, and they know their child's diagnoses, and they know their child's personality, sometimes you change the way you connect with them when you're in the presence of other people who don't have all that information and they make judgments about you.
And that can impact the child's self-esteem, the child's trust in you, the child's awareness of how the world works and all that, right?
Yeah.
So one of the ways to keep our shame story from impacting our kids is to look at our own story and our own childhood and upbringing with empathy and without any judgment. Yes. This is something that you call reflective parenting. Yes. Will you please talk to us a little about this?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we forget how much we bring from our childhood, especially if we survived it, right? We forget that it was hard for us to be in a family that didn't see us, that didn't hear us, that wasn't there for us. And so when you become a parent, sometimes you've buried a lot of that because you survived it or you've moved past it, or maybe you don't even contact those people anymore. And I think sometimes we don't realize that if we haven't healed some of that story, if we haven't addressed it, it'll come up in the way we raise our kid. For instance, if we lived in a household where we were told to be a child and we were to be quiet and only speak when we're spoken to, even if that hurt us then, we learned how to survive it. So we think, I'm okay, right? It's okay. So then we might end up doing it to our child. Same thing with spanking, right? If we grew up with a childhood where we got spanked, but we survived it, we might think, okay, well, it didn't hurt me that bad because I'm okay. And so then you might end up hurting your child that way without really understanding how that impacted you. And so a lot of times what I do with families, especially parents who are holding on to some outdated practices like spanking or timeouts or certain things like that, is I talk about how that felt for you when you were a child. And, you'll usually say, well, I'm okay. And I say, that's fine. You're okay now. And I'm really proud of you for being okay now. But let's talk about the 3-year-old you or the 8-year-old you. Were they okay? And it's really interesting for parents to go back there and realize I was scared and I was sad and I didn't know who to trust and I didn't know who was going to be there for me. And then I say, now imagine how maybe your 8-year-old might be feeling if you're using some of those same practices. Do you think they could be feeling that same level of fear and distrust? And then they begin to realize that it's not about being okay. Now it's about really thinking about the foundation that was set for you that now you're setting for your child. Your child might grow up to be okay, but at the end of the day, what was that foundation you set? And so that's a really good way for me to kind of help manage our shame stories, and sometimes even manage that phrase that people say, this happened to me, but I'm okay now. Right? How do we manage that? Because you are okay now, but how do we manage what happened to you maybe when you were younger?
Right. And when we're doing this, we have to be careful to view it in a very non-judgmental and self-empathetic way, right? So we don't end up making that another shame story, because we don't want to turn that into another new shame story that we are buried under.
Right. And again, having parents to go back to that space where they were when they were younger can be hard for them. And so I do it when they're ready. We talk about, how did you survive your family? What made you stronger? What made you resilient? And then when they're ready and they have that safe space with me or with whoever they're working with, then we begin to talk about those feelings, because I think there's a reason why we bury them. There's a reason why we get disconnected from our shame stories, because it's hard and it hurts. And so I want to get them back in touch with it without harming them and reharming them or bringing up a new same story. So that way they can see how maybe that might be the same space that their child might be in when they're using certain parenting practices.
Right. So another thing to keep in mind here is our goal with reflective parenting is to keep our shame story from impacting our kids.
Yes.
It's not to keep them from ever having a shame story, because human nature, they are going to have their own stories, and there is nothing, no matter how much we hate the idea, there is nothing we can really keep from them building their own shame stories. Our goal is to A, not let our shame story become theirs, and B, empower them to deal with their own shame stories. We cannot go after trying to remove or keep them from ever having a shame story, right?
Right. And I think that's difficult because we don't want to see our children struggle at all, right? We want them to be better than us. We want them to do better than us. And what I often say in that moment is, when you can get comfortable with what you've learned from your past life and from your childhood, then you can actually create a safe space for your child to do the same thing. That when they make mistakes or when they do things that aren't great, you don't add to their shame story by giving them those labels of bad or disrespectful or how dare you and how could you, but we sit with them and we say, wow, you made a mistake, right? And that doesn't feel good. What do you want to do? How do you want to move forward, right? Giving them that space to come back and say, I didn't make the best decision, or I didn't do that the way I thought I wanted to do it. And then we as parents, because we have looked at our own shame stories, we've looked at how impactful they have been in our lives, we can kind of have a safe space for them. Not saying that our kids won't feel shame, but they have a safe space to come back and say, I messed up, or I don't like the way I was acting in that moment. And then we can help them, right? We can help them have a healthier resilience around shame than maybe we did when we were growing up.
I like that. So I want to take a step back right now because shame is kind of a complex topic, and it's kind of hard to understand where it comes from. And there is one scenario that you speak about in your book that instantly connected with me, and that was simple enough for me to understand. And I'm thinking that it'll be easy enough for all our viewers to also see where this kind of shame comes in our parenting. So the one that you talk about is, so we are out and about doing our own thing, and we come across this person who is a total jerk, right? So by the nature of being parents, we have two things that come up in our mind almost instantly, and I'm pretty sure almost universally. And the first thing is, that person's parents should have taught him better. And the second thing that comes to our mind is, I am never, ever, ever going to let my child become that person. And now that bar is set, and every time our child strays from that perfect path a little off the path, and that bar comes and beats us on the backside and says, you're not doing your job. And we start going down the slippery slope of, oh my God, I'm not teaching my child right. Oh my God, look at how they're behaving. Oh my God. I'm failing. Oh my gosh, I suck. And that becomes our shame story, right? So talk to us a little about how we can keep ourselves from spiraling down this path of building a new shame story every other day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the first thing we have to realize is that as humans, every one of us has a little bit of a jerk inside of us. We're not always perfect. If you catch us at the wrong time of the day, if you catch us if we haven't had food yet, if you catch us at the wrong time, we're not the nicest. And so I think one of the things that we have to do with our kids is to really understand first, what do we look like when we're jerks? And acknowledge that there are times when I haven't been the nicest either to customer service agents, to people on the street when I'm driving. I haven't always been my nicest self. So when we see it happen in our kids, to really get curious, are they doing this because they're having a hard time? Are they doing this because there's a need that they haven't gotten met and they don't know how to get that need met? Or are they doing this because this is who they are? This is their personality. Most of the time, what I've seen, it's the first two. It's a child who's having a hard time, or a child who doesn't know the proper way to get their needs met. And so they show up in a really maladaptive way, in a way that we might want to call them a jerk or a bad kid. And so for us as adults in their lives, we have to say, wow, it seems like you're having a really hard time getting XYZ met, right? And yelling at me isn't the right way to do it, or hitting your brother isn't the right way to do it. This is how you can do it. And it's okay to be angry, right? It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be disappointed, right? Teaching them that feelings and emotional vocabulary. So that way, when they feel angry, they don't think the first thing I should do is yell at everybody. They think I should tell people I'm angry and I don't know what to do, but I want to go in my room, or I don't want to play anymore, right? And so we, interestingly enough, have to learn how to do that too, right? Because when we're having a bad day, we have to learn how to say I'm angry. We have to learn how to say I'm sad or I'm disappointed, because then our kids will learn. Right. And then then it demystifies that whole idea of, oh my God, I'm raising a jerk. Listen, we're all not the best sometimes, but when we learn better how to express ourselves, then we kind of become less and less of that maladaptive person.
Right. I love that. So that brings us to a point where I think we can stop this first segment. I still have a whole list of questions here that I wanted to ask you, but I don't think we can get to it in time, because I want to cover a couple of other segments with you. I want to dive into those. So we're going to stop this here. And everyone listening at home, our inspiration for this masterclass is Shame-Proof Parenting. And our expert guide here is Mercedes Zamudio. Grab a copy of this book when you get a chance, because Mercedes goes a lot deeper in the book about how we build our shame stories, how to overcome our shame stories, reflective parenting, and how we can use intuition. There's a whole ton more that we cannot dive into, but be sure to come back for the next segment of this masterclass, because in that, Mercedes and I are going to dive into a framework